Say, Chuck, you're the diagnostic genius around here. I wonder if you can give me a hand on this 4-liter Cherokee.
Sure, Tom. Just let me go get a few tools, would you? I'll be right back. Hi, and welcome to this month's VideoTec session. You know, Tom thinks I'm a diagnostic wizard, but the fact is, it doesn't take a genius to find and fix the cause of a problem the first time. It does help to have the right tools. When you're dealing with today's electronic control systems, that could mean test jumpers, a volt-ohm meter, the DRB2, or these test procedure manuals. That's right. These diagnostic procedure manuals are really tools. And like any tool, if you know how to get the most out of them, they can make your job a lot easier. The first thing you'll have to know about these test procedures is what they cover. Basically, the systems for which there are diagnostic procedures manuals are those that are electronically controlled. These include electronic fuel injection, as well as other systems that use electronic controls like anti-lock braking, motorized seatbelts, and some automatic transmissions. For 1989, the following vehicles and systems are covered. On Jeep Cherokee, 2.5-liter EFI, 4-liter EFI, ABS brakes, and the AW4 transmissions. On Jeep Wrangler, 2.5-liter EFI. On Eagle Premier, 2.5-liter EFI, 3-liter EFI, AR4 trans, and passive restraints. And on Eagle Summit, 1.5-liter EFI and 1.6-liter EFI. In the future, other manuals will be released covering other vehicles and systems. Most of the tests in the diagnostic procedures manuals are designed to work with the DRB2. Once the DRB2 has narrowed down the cause of the problem to a particular area, the procedures help you quickly zero in on the exact cause and tell you how to correct it. Although the layout of the diagnostic procedures manuals varies somewhat from one book to another, they have some important common features. I'll use this book as an example. It's the 1989 Powertrain Diagnostic Procedures Manual for the 2.5 and 4-liter XJ vehicles. Each manual has an introduction section. It contains information about the manual itself and how to use it. You'll also find an explanation of how to hook up the DRB2 using the proper cartridge and adapter for the systems and vehicles covered in the manual. Usually, this is followed by instructions for using the DRB2 and a list of the possible tests you can perform with it. Sometimes, the introduction will contain general information about the systems covered by the manual. This will include an explanation of system operation and possible problems. In the introduction to most of the diagnostic procedures manuals, you'll also find general diagnostic procedures and helpful information that you may need to complete some of the tests. For example, this ECU checkout procedure should be performed at any time the test procedure indicates that the ECU may be the cause of the problem. Following the introduction are the test procedures themselves. The number of test procedure sections will depend on the number of systems covered. Individual tests are grouped by system. For example, the first test procedure section in this XJ manual contains the tests for the 2.5-liter engine. Notice that in the Powertrain Diagnostic Procedures manuals, each different engine is treated as a separate system. Now, here you can see that the individual tests correspond to system fault codes. In some books, they're identified as a fault number, and in others, they're identified as a test number. The other 1989 Jeep and Eagle test procedure manuals are organized in the same way. except for this manual, which covers the powertrain diagnostic procedures for the 1.5 and the 1.6 liter EFI engines built by Mitsubishi Motors. These engines are currently used in the Eagle Summit. In these books, the tests are also grouped by system, but within each of the system sections, the tests are further grouped into visual inspection, the no-start tests, and the drivability tests. When using these procedure manuals, you should always perform the visual inspection first. Then, if the customer complaint or problem involves a no-start condition, proceed to those tests. For any other drivability condition, the next step is the drivability tests. Instead of being identified by fault codes, the tests in this manual have test numbers. You must always start with the test number 1 in a given test procedure. For example, test NS1 is the first test in the no-start test procedure. From there, the procedure itself will direct you to the proper test number at each step. For example, here, if the no-start condition is not due to a lack of spark, the procedure sends you to the fuel test. The procedure will also tell you when to hook up the DRB2. In this no-start test, you may find the problem by testing the ignition system without using the DRB2. If you don't, the procedure tells you to begin testing with the DRB2 at this point. One key to using the Jeep and Eagle diagnostic procedures manuals is knowing when to use them. You'll find diagnostic tips, procedures, and information in a variety of sources, including the service manuals. Remember that the diagnostic procedures manuals are designed mainly to help you diagnose electronically controlled systems. They're also designed to work with the DRB2. Obviously, if you're diagnosing a problem with a system that doesn't have electronic controls and can't be tested with the DRB2, you'll have to refer to other sources. For example, there is no diagnostic procedures manual to help you diagnose suspension problems or body leaks. To diagnose problems like those, you'd refer to the proper service manual. You also have to know when to use the DRB2. With most of the diagnostic procedures manuals, you first perform a system test with the DRB2. If the DRB2 finds a fault code, you refer to the test procedure for that fault code. As we saw with the powertrain diagnostic procedures for the 1.5 and the 1.6 liter MMC engines, however, you must refer to the manual first. The test procedures will then tell you if and when to hook up the DRB2. Let's look at a typical flowchart in this diagnostic procedures manual that covers passive restraints and the AR4 transaxle on the 1989 Premier models. In either type of manual, the individual tests are flowcharts. They lead you through the procedures step by step. You always start in the upper left-hand corner of the flowchart. As you can see, there are 3 basic symbols that you'll find in the flowcharts. Rectangles contain instructions that tell you what to do. Diamonds are decision points. Based on an action you've just performed, they ask you to answer a yes or no question, like this one. This arrow is used when an individual test will not fit on a single page. It directs you to another page where the flowchart is continued. A similar arrow on that page will tell you that this is a continuation of the first flowchart. In some manuals, arrows are also used to indicate the start of an individual test, like this. Generally, the flowcharts go from the upper left-hand corner of the page to the lower right-hand corner. How they actually flow, however, will depend on the number of branches in the flowchart and how it fits on the page. Notice that all the lines have arrows to indicate which direction they're going. Sometimes you'll see large rectangles that are not part of the actual flowcharts. These contain comments or additional information related to the test you're performing. Other information, such as tables and charts, may be included on the same page as the flowchart, but will not actually be a part of it. Notice that the flowcharts are always on right-hand pages. On the facing left-hand pages, you'll usually find simplified schematics and component or connector illustrations that will help you with your testing. Notice that the schematics are not as detailed as those found in the service manual wiring diagrams. Also notice that in different books, different illustration styles may be used, but they will always provide the same type of information. Now, sometimes the test procedure will require you to refer to other sources of information. For instance, you may be asked to test a particular component. You can refer to the component checkout procedures found in both the service manuals and the blue component manuals. To show you how the Jeep and Eagle Diagnostic Procedures manuals can help with an actual diagnosis, let's go give Tom a hand with that 1989 4-liter Cherokee. I'm going to take the 1989 Powertrain Diagnostic Procedures manual for the 2.5 and 4-liter XJ vehicles, the DRB2 with the Jeep Eagle adapter and cartridge, and the digital volt ohm meter. Okay, Tom, what seems to be the problem?
Well, the customer uses this Cherokee to pull a pretty heavy load, a travel trailer or something. And he's complained that sometimes it misfires when he's pulling it up a grade. Now, I did a visual inspection for anything obvious like loose wires, but I couldn't find anything.
Okay, missing under load is an engine problem, so let's start our diagnosis with an engine system test using the DRB2. Our first step will be to hook up the DRB2. Now remember, if you need any help using the DRB2, you can refer to the introduction section of the Diagnostic Procedures Manual. You can also find more information on using the DRB2 in the January 1989 VideoTec session and in the user's manual that comes with the DRB2.
Once the DRB2 is hooked up, I can use the F3 key for help too, correct?
Good point, but only when you're using the Jeep Eagle cartridge and adapter. With the MMC cartridge, F3 switches between English and metric measurements. Okay, you take the DRB2 and I'll hook up the adapter. Now I start by connecting the adapter cable to the diagnostic connectors here on the right-hand side of the engine compartment. These yellow covers make them easy to identify, and the connectors are keyed so that they'll only go on the right way. Then I connect the other cable from the adapter to the DRB2. Now just insert the proper cartridge into the DRB2.
With the label up, like this?
Right. Now the DRB2 will go through its self-test and then we'll be ready to start. Okay, now we're going to run an engine test on this 4-liter Cherokee. So just tell the DRB2 you want to select a vehicle and choose the proper model year and equipment.
Done that, and now I confirm my choices. Okay, I'm ready to choose a function. Now, I want system tests, correct?
Right. And from that menu, you want the engine test.
Okay, the first instruction is to turn the key on.
I'll do that and see what happens.
Okay, the DRB2 display says testing. And now it reads fault 1212, injector 3 circuit open.
Okay, we found a fault code. Now at this point, the DRB2 will stop the test and we'll have to refer to the Diagnostic Procedures manuals to continue our diagnosis. Now in the section for the 4-liter engine, I just look up the test for fault code 1212, which begins on page 266. Now remember that the individual tests are identified by fault codes. Once you read a fault code with the DRB2, just look up the proper test for that fault code. Okay. Now, here's the test code we want. It actually covers fault codes 1210 through 1215.
I see. Now, each of the 6 fault codes indicates an open and a different injector circuit.
Right. Always start in the upper left-hand corner of the flowchart. The first instruction is to turn the key off. Okay, I'll just turn the ignition off and you check the next step in the procedure.
Okay, the next instruction is to disconnect the appropriate injector per table. Well, here's the table. It shows that for fault 1212, we should disconnect injector 3.
And remember, that means the injector for cylinder number 3, not injector number 3 in the firing order.
That's easy enough. There, that should do it. Now let's see what the next step is. The procedure tells us to check for continuity from appropriate injector harness pin B to ground.
And remember that you can usually find connector illustrations right in the Diagnostic Procedures Manual on the page facing the flowchart.
Well, this connector illustration for the fuel injector harness will help me to locate pin B.
For a simple continuity check like this, we can use a continuity checker function on the DRB2. First, connect this test lead. Then just press the volt-ohm button twice. Now we're in the continuity mode. To check for continuity to ground, all I have to do is touch the test probe to pin B of the connector. There's no need for a second test lead because the DRB2 grounds through the system.
Oh, the DRB2 shows that we have continuity to ground.
See what our next step is.
Well, now we've reached a decision diamond. Oh, I see. Based on the continuity check that we've just made, there are 2 possible paths. If there had been no continuity, we'd have to repair the open ground circuit to the fuel injector connector. Because there was continuity, however, our next step is to disconnect the ECU.
Okay, now that I've got the ECU disconnected, we're ready for the next step.
Well, the procedure tells us to check for continuity from pin A of the injector harness to the appropriate ECU connector pin. Now, according to the table, that's pin A1.
Remember, we can refer to the illustrations on the page facing the flowchart in the Diagnostic Procedures Manual.
Well, here's the illustration. And there's pin A1. It's on the 24-pin ECU connector.
Okay, when I turn the connector like it's shown in the manual, cavity A1 is here in the upper left. Because we're checking from one part of the circuit to another instead of to ground, we'll have to use an ohm meter. Hand me one lead.
Okay, and I'll probe cavity A of the injector connector with the other lead, right?
Right. Do we have continuity?
Yep, sure do. And we've reached another decision diamond in the flowchart. Because we did find continuity, the next step tells us to refer to component testing of the injector.
Remember, you can find the proper component testing procedures in one of 3 possible places. In the component manual for 4-liter multi-point injection components, in the Jeep service manual, Group 14, fuel systems, or sometimes right in the Diagnostic Procedures Manual itself.
Oh, this injector was bad. It had a high resistance. So now that we've replaced it, that should fix the problem, right?
Not so fast. First, we should run the engine system test with the DRB2. That way we'll make sure that we have fixed the problem and that there aren't any other faults that we didn't read the first time. All right, we couldn't find any other engine problems. Now what?
Well, that means that we should do a road test to verify the fix, right?
Good idea. But while we're at it, we can also run a test on another electronically controlled system that could cause related symptoms, the AW4 transmission. For 1989, There's a separate book covering ABS brakes and the AW4 on Jeep XJ. You all set with that DRB2?
Ready. Now my first step is to select the proper vehicle and equipment from the DRB2 menu, correct?
Right.
Let's see. Okay, then I can confirm my choices and select system tests.
Right. Now this time, choose the AW4 trans test.
Well, now I have a choice between the full test and a road test.
We want the full test, which includes the road test.
Okay, well that's choice number 2. The display says to turn the key on. Okay, now it says to put the trans in comfort. Now in power, shift to 1, 2, shift to 3, shift to drive, step on the brake pedal. All right, release the brake, shift to 3 again, shift it back to park. Now it tells you to slowly depress the accelerator. The little stars on the display are disappearing. There's nothing happening.
Press enter and see what happens.
All right, there's a fault code. Number 705, the throttle position sensor fault.
Just as in the engine systems test, the DRB2 will stop testing at this point. Now we'll have to refer to the Diagnostic Procedures Manual to continue our diagnosis. Okay, let's find the test for fault code 705. It's on page 84.
Oh, I see. The first step is to unplug the TPS. There it is. Okay. Okay, now that it's been disconnected, let's see what's next. Second step is to unplug the TCU.
Now that connector is inside the passenger compartment. Okay, now the TCU is disconnected.
Well, the next step is to check for continuity from pin D1 of the TCU connector to pin A of the TPS connector.
Remember that connector illustrations are usually found on the page facing the flowchart for any test.
Well, both the TCU and the TPS connectors are shown here.
Remember, we could use the continuity checker function of the DRB2 to check for continuity to ground. But for checking from one point in a circuit to another, we'll need an ohmmeter again.
There's no continuity in this circuit. According to the test procedure, that means the problem is the open between TCU connector D1 and TPS connector A. That means that we should fix the open in the circuit and retest with the DRB2, right?
Right. If you look at the flow of the test procedure, you can see that it follows good diagnostic logic designed to save you time in finding the cause of the problem. The first things you check are the circuits from the transmission control unit to the throttle position sensor. If those are okay, then you start checking the components. Now, let's fix the problem and run a complete AW4 system test, including the road test.
Oh, everything checks out. I guess we fixed both problems. Using the test procedure manuals and the DRB2 sure made the diagnosis go quickly.
As electronic controls are designed into more and more vehicle systems, you'll be able to use the DRB2 and the Jeep Eagle Diagnostic Procedures manuals to help you fix a wider variety of conditions. Like most good tests, the Diagnostic Procedures manuals are based on common sense. They're designed to help you get to the cause of a problem quickly and to prevent you from replacing good components or wasting time on dead ends. In this VideoTec session and last month's, we've covered both the DRB2 and the Diagnostic Procedures Manuals. When you know how to use both of these tools properly and make them work together, you'll improve your percentage of first-time fixes and make the most of your valuable time.